kids would be proud.
Yes, that's what I was hoping you would like.
I would have brought one extra one for you. Yes. Yeah. Need that,
Can you position us?
Yeah, let me.
Where should we be?
Okay, we could definitely use more people on this side.
Does anybody have a soccer ball? Put in the front here.
They can come closer because they'll be speaking, yeah. Okay, we need a few people with signs. Oh, happy to be here.
Good to see you.
I know. Things are crazy. Could use some signs. Make sure your sign isn't upside down. Tim can be anywhere, but the sign would be nice.
Over here?
Yeah, that's good.
You want to come?
Well, we want to have our probably have our main.
So
Right here is good.
right here?
Yep.
Thank you. Right here. You should have brought the whole soul. We don't want to block. Do you want to switch?
Yeah, that's a good corner to be in.
I can be in the back.
Okay. Yep.
That's a good corner.
Good corner.
Make sure your sign.
Whenever I see that was
that was the thing. There it is. Who do I introduce?
I'll come and do introductions for you, so you don't have to worry about it. I thought you'd like that. It's less stressful. Yeah.
I'm sure very well.
Okay. We sounding okay?
More photographs.
Give it a 10.
All right. Think we're ready? Okay, everyone, we'll get started. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. We really, really appreciate it. I'm Danielle Gunn. I'm Chief Communications Officer for the Planetary Society. We're the world's largest independent space interest organization. And we are here today at the Capitol to speak up against the staggering, unprecedented cuts being proposed to NASA's science budget. We have gathered a coalition of 20 national space science and educational organizations who have brought a combined 300 advocates from all over the country who are walking the halls of Congress right now to speak with their representatives and urge them to fund NASA science. We will hear from select speakers today, including Bill Nye, CEO of the Planetary Society, Representative Glenn Ivey of Maryland's 4th District, Marcel Agueros, President-elect of the American Astronomical Society, and Brandon Jones, President of the American Geophysical Union. After our speakers give their brief remarks, we'll open it up to press Q&As, and if anyone is interested in any one-on-ones, we can also arrange those for you. So we will go ahead and get started with our first speaker, Bill Nye, CEO of the Planetary Society. He's joined by members of our board of directors, Newton Campbell, Bethany Ellman, Brittany Schmidt, and Robert Picardo.
Good afternoon. I am Bill Nye, CEO of the Planetary Society, an organization representing nearly 50,000 people around the globe. Every day, citizens like you and me who believe the exploration of space is worthy use of our intellect and treasure. Rovers on Mars looking for the elusive the space program. These proposed cuts would force the premature termination of dozens of missions. Fully functioning spacecraft summarily turned off. Development work on virtually every future science mission summarily halted. We're not talking about delays in scientific exploration. We're talking about the end of it. While we're checking out, our competitors are checking in. There will be new Sputnik moments. Taikonauts of the China National Space Administration will almost certainly walk on the moon in the next 5 years. China Space will almost certainly return rock samples from Mars, which may carry the elusive evidence of ancient life before we can. Stunning pictures of these events will appear on the main page of every website, with every microphone button. We're back in business. Like, we wouldn't have this technology without space, you guys. We wouldn't have these cameras without space exploration and charge-coupled device cameras. So this is a turning point. This is a key point in this history of space exploration, and for me, for us, a key turning point in the history of the United States. These pictures of people walking on Mars, these pictures and images of rock samples brought back, people walking on the moon, rock samples brought back from Mars, will be on the front page of every newspaper. They'll be on the main page of every news website in the world. So that's why we are all here today. 20 national organizations have come together. Over 300 supporters from every corner of the country have traveled here on their own dime and on their own time to walk the halls of Congress and save NASA science. This is not a luxury. It is a responsibility. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 of the U.S. Constitution recommends to Congress that they promote the progress of science and useful arts. It's in the Constitution. So commercial companies may provide transportation to orbit, and they may provide some major spacecraft components, but when it comes to exploration, there is no private option. There is no business case for the search for extraterrestrial life. There is no profit to be made studying Saturn's mysterious polar storm. No one is cashing in on whatever dark matter does to influence the motions of our galaxies and other galaxies in the cosmos. Yet NASA science is a bargain. For every dollar spent, at least 3 come back into the economy. Last year, NASA's investment in science generated more than $20 billion of economic growth and supported over 80,000 jobs in all 50 states. Shutting off this economic engine would be microphone buttons to pass a budget into law that protects NASA and NASA science. NASA's exploration of space is where, as Teddy Roosevelt said, we dare mighty things. Cuts to NASA science will not make the U.S. stronger. Investing in it will. Let's keep the United States the world leader in space for all of us and for generations to come. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, it is my honor to introduce a man who hails from my mother's home state, the great state of Maryland. Ladies and gentlemen, Glenn Ivey. Woo! Oh, here.
I'm going to stay away from that microphone button. Let's hear it for Bill Nye. All right.
If you open your folder, you could hit.
I'm going to go without notes, I guess. So we'll and to the Planetary Society. What a turnout! My goodness. Yeah. You guys roll thick. I like this. I like this. In all seriousness, this is an important day, an important moment to be out here, and I appreciate the fact that they've come out in such large numbers to make the point that this is a critical moment for the United States when it comes to science, and NASA in particular. As Bill pointed out, we're falling behind with respect to China. They're pushing money towards, money and engineers and scientists towards advancing science in China, competing against us, while we're doing the exact opposite. The White House almost wants to zero out NASA science. And if you look at the other cuts across the board with respect to NIH and other key departments and agencies, we're doing all the wrong things. We need to, instead of choking off the pipeline of talent, we need to expand it so we can bring more people. I was a kid when we first started landing on the moon, and I remember we'd roll the TVs into the classroom so you could actually see it. And it inspired a whole generation of scientists watching that and just imagining what was possible and wanting to be part of that. We need to make sure we continue to do that work, continue to inspire the next generation, give them paths forward, whether it's respect to college or graduate school or internships and fellowships at places like NASA, so they can learn how to do the work from the people who've been doing it for decades and learning how to make a difference for the public sector here in the United States, but also for the world. So I think it's critical for us to make sure that the United States continues maximum funding. I think the House and the Senate, we're moving in a much better direction than the White House. I hope the House recedes to the Senate because they had even more money in there for the science expansion efforts. But we need to keep that going. So it's going to be a pivotal time when we get back. We're going to keep fighting about, well, I don't know when we're going to get back, but when we do, it's going to be an important moment to make sure we hash this out, commit ourselves to funding science moving forward so we can win the future just like as we have in the past. So with that, I'll turn it back. But thanks so much to all of you all for coming out. Keep up the great work.
And now we have Marcel Agueros from the American Astronomical Society, President-elect.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. My name is Marcel Agueros. I'm a professor of astronomy at Columbia University in New York City, and I am the president-elect of the American Astronomical Society, the AAS. The AAS represents more than 8,000 astronomers and astronomy educators. Our mission is to enhance and share humanity's scientific understanding of the universe as a diverse and inclusive astronomical community. I'm here today to request continued support for Congress in advancing this mission, especially in light of the existential threat that astronomy and science as a whole are facing from the President's budget request. Speaking to you today on behalf of the AAS is not something I could have imagined 22 years ago when NASA changed the course of my career by awarding me a Harriet Jenkins Predoctoral Fellowship, and I'm wearing my Jenkins pin with pride. This opportunity set me on a path to be an eager user of NASA's satellite telescopes, and I've been privileged to use data from the Hubble Space Telescope, the Chandra X-ray Observatory, the Kepler Space Telescope, and the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite, or TESS. And I want to emphasize that I'm naming these missions because each of them represents a groundbreaking marriage of science and technology that has transformed our understanding, and not just of some obscure physical process that might be of interest to a few of us, but of our place in the universe. And my favorite example of this is that when I was in college, it was still unclear whether there were planets outside of the solar system, something that people had debated at least since antiquity. After Kepler launched in 2009, it quickly became clear that there are planets everywhere. To date, Kepler and TESS have discovered 3,500 planets outside of our solar system, and TESS is still finding more. We now think that on average, there is a planet for every star in our galaxy. That is a profound change in our perspective. Having this personal history with NASA is part of what makes seeing the proposed cuts to existing telescopes and the proposed underfunding of NASA's next great observatory, the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, so devastating. NASA has shown an exceptional ability to maintain and repurpose telescopes like Hubble well past their nominal end dates, so that the missions in space today are carrying out cutting-edge science that nobody imagined when they launched. The Roman Space Telescope is the next entry in this list of missions pushing the limits of discovery. Roman will not only revolutionize our understanding of dark matter and dark energy, it is expected to add 100,000 planets to our census. Roman is on budget and ahead of schedule. Underinvesting in it today would not only result in a major scientific loss, it would be a major waste of taxpayer dollars. NASA is also essential to the nation as we train the next generation of scientists. Some of that training is possible because of the NASA grants that support early career researchers, as in the fellowship I received. But I also want to highlight the impact of other NASA programs, such as the National Space Grant College and Fellowship Project. In New York State alone, Space Grant has allowed more than 80,000 students to intern at universities, science centers, and private companies. At Columbia, Space Grant also invested in our department's public outreach program, which reaches thousands of New Yorkers every year, from kindergartners to retirees. NASA's ability to touch the lives of aspiring scientists and of ordinary people remains unmatched. To close, I want to remind us that NASA is part of a broader ecosystem. The National Science Foundation's support of researchers at all career stages is another key ingredient in the success of our field. And the telescopes built and operated by the National Science Foundation and the Department of Energy are indispensable counterparts to our space-based observatories. The Vera C. Rubin Observatory recently released its first astonishing images, and if you haven't seen them, I highly encourage you to look them up. And next year, we'll start on what will be a 10-year movie of the night sky. Data from the Rubin Observatory, when combined with data from the Roman Space Telescope, will enable even higher quality science than either of these facilities will produce on their own. It is therefore critical that Congress provide robust support not only for NASA science, but for all of our science agencies. I'm very grateful that Congress has rejected many of the drastic cuts proposed in the President's budget request. I hope that today's very visible groundswell of support will further encourage Congress to fully fund and defend NASA, the National Science Foundation, and the other science agencies that together are amongst our nation's crown jewels. Thank you very much for your time.
Now we have Brandon Jones, President of the American Geophysical Union.
Good afternoon, everyone. As was mentioned, I'm Brandon Jones, President of the AGU, and we are a global organization, the largest professional society for Earth and space scientists in the world. We have over 40,000 members across 200 countries and regions. But I'm here also today to talk about the personal impacts of funding cuts over this past year. I just took early retirement last week from the National Science Foundation, where I served as a program director for almost 10 years, and prior to that at another science agency for over 12 years. So I have 20 plus years in the federal government and also working with a professional society to make sure that the research enterprise is as viable and as bolstered as it can be. NSF has been an innovation engine, but those innovations and those discoveries that come out of that basic research have to have somewhere to go. And so when NSF partners with organizations and agencies like NASA to make sure that those innovations move into spaces where they can be, no pun intended, where they can be applied, this is for the benefit of all of society. And during my time at NSF, I mainly worked on workforce development and broadening participation efforts to make sure that all Americans who were interested in science could have that opportunity and make sure they have those experiences. So now we're facing a group or a generation of early career scientists, high school, undergrad, graduate, postdocs, even early career assistant professors at institutions who have just come out of a global pandemic, pushed their way through, and now they're facing this. And so it is up to us as agencies, as professional societies, to continue to build the coalitions that will stand the time honored tradition of sustainability in the sciences and make sure the ecosystem that we know drives the economy and makes the U.S. a leader in science remains. So in closing, I just want to thank everyone that has come out today and all the coalitions. Representative Ivey, I live in Maryland, so thank you so much for what you do for the state. I grew up watching you, so it is an honor for me to be here to speak with them. So thank you all for everything you're doing.
All right, we will open it up for questions. I want to introduce another member of the Planetary Society. Casey Dreyer, our Chief of Space Policy, who helped organize today's Day of Action. So if you have any questions for us, please state your name, your outlet, and who you would like to ask the question to. Any questions? Yes.
Miller with WTOP for Congressman Ivey. Can you talk a little bit about, there's been cuts in Maryland related to the sciences and how that's impacted the region around?
It's been awful for our region for sure, but across the nation. We've had thousands of federal government employees who've been laid off, who are doing fantastic work at NASA, for example. NIH had a woman come up to me yesterday at church and say that she'd been running a clinical trial. I think hers was pediatric cancer, and she got terminated in the middle of it without completing the clinical trial, which means, it's not like a light switch. You can just pick back up where you left off. They've got to go back and do years to catch up to where they were. So it's a huge impact. It's a terrible impact on the science side. It's really devastating. And as we mentioned, people coming up and trying to go through school, University of Maryland is in my district, but other schools too. Harvard had a real challenge with respect to the administration attacking and trying to block people from going to school there who are on the science track. So it's undermining the country from an intellectual and academic standpoint, from a scientific research standpoint, and I think it's going to be devastating from an economic standpoint, as Mr. Nye pointed out. Oh, yes?
Thank you very much. You mentioned you do have so many federal workers in your district. I imagine at some point this is really going to start hurting, the bottom line of, folks that are paycheck to paycheck. They're just going to try to make ends meet. Have you spoken to Leader Jeffries at all about how this is going to impact you specifically, your constituents, and what about the political ramifications?
Well, it didn't just happen now in my district. This goes all the way back to January 20th. The Trump administration has been pushing people out, no matter what a great job they've been doing, in the thousands as fast as they can out of government service. Obviously, we've talked with the leadership, Mr. Jeffries for sure too, but I think everybody understands, since I think 85% of federal government workers are outside of the DMV, this is impacting everybody across the country. They get it, they feel it, but I think everybody also understands that the fight for health care to try and restore the $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid that were made, and to make sure that the ACA tax credits get extended, because you're impacting millions of people with the potential of losing health care coverage and shutting down hospital facilities and the like across the country. We understand what a big fight this is. My constituents, even the ones who've been fired, even the ones who've been furloughed, even the ones who are struggling to make ends meet, at least so far what I've heard from them is that we need to stay in this fight and be in it to win it. I think he's been great so far. If you think back on the votes, I think we had all but one vote in the Democratic side opposing the bill that we're fighting about now. It's like 211 to 1, if I recall correctly. And he's done that over and over and over again. He's held the caucus together. So I think he'll continue to do that, and it'll make a difference. When those health care notes hit, telling people that their rates are about to double or triple, I think the Republicans will start maybe getting a little bit more interested in having a conversation and working this out.
Are you tracking any cuts to NASA or any other science-related elements in the DMV area in relation to the shutdown?
Well, yeah, we're doing both, I think. So we were tracking what the cuts were with respect to the legislation we were just discussing. And that's been a big focus. It went through the appropriations committees. We're not sure how that's going to play out. There'll be a conference to help sort that out. I know that they're tracking the overall impact of the shutdown. They always do. So, we'll see how it goes. You have to see how long it goes.
May I step in? If you want specifics about, by the way, sir, where are you from? With the organization that is? Reuters. I thought, sorry. Casey Dreyer, our guy, has analyzed the effect of NASA budget on every congressional district, and you can find his work on our website. Just want to throw that.
Yes. Isam?
This is for anyone. You all mentioned that the president's budget has significant cuts to NASA, but the House and Senate versions were very different from the president's proposal. Do you all have those same concerns about what's coming out of Congress?
And introduce yourself.
Yeah. Casey Dreyer, Chief of Space Policy. Can you elaborate on concerns?
Any concerns about projects being cut or workforce cuts?
The overall gist of both House and Senate is a near full rejection of the proposed cuts to NASA science and broadly around other areas of NASA as well. There are preferred things in the Senate as a more rounded, it basically keeps everything the same. It keeps Earth science and heliophysics and other aspects of NASA science whole. The House has a little bit way to go on that one, but we have some really good provisions in the House budget that mandates minimum spending levels, other key provisions supporting key missions. So there's actually a lot to choose from, we can do a best of both projects, or both appropriations bills, and really come out with a great NASA budget. So I can't emphasize enough how much thanks we're actually telling Congress today for the work that they've already done, and that this is really, once the shutdown is over, finishing the job on appropriations.
And that's Casey Dreyer, D-R-E-I-E-R. Another question? Yep.
Hi, Audrey Decker with Politico.
Hi.
For Congressman Ivey, just following up on a previous question, can you maybe detail more of any of the changes that you're seeing right now going on at Goddard? There's been some buildings being closed down and the budget being enacted before Congress has its say. So what are you seeing in those changes?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are good points. They closed the visitor center, for example. The concern, I think, overall is reflected what Mr. Dreyer was just discussing. So in some instances, NASA is one of these, but across the board, the administration is not spending money that was appropriated for certain functions. And they're doing it in a unilateral way. Normally, an administration would come back to the Hill, the so-called four corners, the top leaders on the appropriations committees in the House and the Senate, and run it by them and get a sign-off. The Trump administration hasn't necessarily been doing that. And there's concern about that being done in a more expansive way because the president and Russell Vought have threatened to do more of it, frankly, in the future. So definite concern there, and that's part of what we're trying to have worked out as part of the resolution to the legislation that's got us in the shutdown right now.
What would that be? What would you be asking for?
Well, it's not me. I'm not negotiating the bill. But they're looking for written assurances that the money that's appropriated will be spent the way it's supposed to be spent, according to the appropriations report language and actual language.
Any other questions? Okay, and if you would, yep, go ahead.
Well, I'll tell you what they've been telling me, which is what's new. He's been doing that since he got here in January. He's been forcing us out, sometimes in violation of the law, sometimes in violation of court injunctions, regardless of whether people are doing their job well or not, regardless in some instances of if enough people remain to continue to do the work that the agency or department is tasked with doing. So they get it. They know that he's going to move forward with firing as many federal government employees as he possibly can. And this is a threat that they don't think is any different from what he's been doing before. And I think they're right.
Any other questions? Okay, if we'd like to arrange any one-on-ones, you can come speak to us after the conference closes. I'd like to thank all of our coalition partners for joining us. Representative Ivey, thank you so much for joining us. Our amazing advocates, take a good picture of those folks. We have more press resources available at planetary.org, and anyone watching can learn more about what the Planetary Society does at planetary.org. Thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate it. Have a good afternoon.
Hey, man. Right. Oh, we're meeting now, so here we go.
Tired of feeling out of shape? This Monday, October 6th, we start the Women's Calisthenics Program for Beginners.
Build strength and lose up to 23 pounds of belly fat with just 7 minutes a day. In a week, you'll feel stronger. In 2 weeks, you'll see it. In a month, you won't stop receiving compliments. All you have to do is open the app and follow along. You in?
I'm joined now by All Rise News' Adam Klasfeld. Now, Adam, yesterday you and I spoke about a major ruling that happened in Oregon where a Trump-appointed judge blocked Trump's deployment of troops to that state. And of course, these troops were deployed to Portland. And so in light of this new ruling in Oregon, how does this impact the existing lawsuit that's happening in California? Now, just as a reminder for folks who are watching, in California, pretty much the same situation has occurred in Los Angeles. This was ultimately blocked in a trial court by Judge Breyer, and now it was appealed up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. But there is a link between what just happened in Oregon and the ongoing case in the Ninth Circuit. So, Adam, can you explain what that link is and whether what Trump just found out in Oregon is going to have some detrimental impact on the ongoing California case?
Absolutely, Brian. Right now, a federal appeals court in California is set to determine whether they're going to review and potentially even overturn a decision that gave Trump the latitude to send the troops into California. It adopted a very permissive standard that the state of California warned that, hey, if you let Trump do this in California, his order for the troops was not geographically limited. It wasn't time limited. He's going to do this again. And that was an argument that they were making from the beginning. And it was an argument that troubled one judge from that circuit enough that on his own, that judge requested the briefing on whether there should be what's known as en banc review. Essentially, a review in the same court with the full bench, about a dozen judges, overruling to determine whether they should overrule what a 3-judge panel found. And what this decision yesterday showed is that it kind of backs up what California was saying, that yes, Trump will use any excuse to try to deploy the military, because the judge's findings in Oregon were that essentially that Trump's declaration was untethered to the facts on the ground. I'm going to read a passage from that ruling, then I'm going to switch to a passage from California Attorney General Rob Bonta, who said that this is just what we warned about, judges, in trying to urge the Ninth Circuit to revisit their very deferential standard. So here's what a Trump appointee found in Oregon. In this case, unlike in Newsom 2, that's the name of the appeal in California, plaintiffs provide substantial evidence that the protests at the Portland ICE facility were not significantly violent or disruptive in the days or even weeks leading up to the president's directive on September 27th, 2025. The record evidence establishes that while disruption outside the Portland ICE facility peaked in June of 2025, federal and local law enforcement officers were able to quell the disorder. As of September 27th, 2025, it had been months since there was any sustained level of violent or disruptive protest activity in Portland. During that time frame, there were sporadic events, either requiring PPB monitoring or federal law enforcement intervention, but overall, the protests were small and uneventful. She concludes a little bit later, in sum, the president is certainly entitled to a great deal of deference, she says, citing the Ninth Circuit, but a great deal of deference is not equivalent to ignoring the facts on the ground. Now, that's where we turn to what Rob Bonta said, the California Attorney General, saying, we warned you that this would happen. Just last week, on September 29th, he wrote to the Ninth Circuit, urging them to revisit and overturn their earlier order, letting Trump send the troops into California. And he said that in this letter, I'm reading to it from it, says that he warned that it was quote, not limited to Los Angeles or even to California. Plaintiffs thus warned that the reasoning in this court's published June 19th stay order would invite the president and Secretary Hegseth to deploy the National Guard in other communities across this circuit in violation of 10 U.S.C. 12406, the Posse Comitatus Act, and longstanding democratic traditions. That prediction has materialized. And then he goes on to cite Trump's directive to Hegseth to provide all necessary troops to protect, quote unquote, war-ravaged Portland. So this is, you get to the heart of it. And I know that I just read a great deal of text from both the ruling and Rob Bonta's response. This is Bonta saying, we told you that if you gave any deference to Trump to send the troops into California based on the set of facts that they put in that case, they would use even weaker facts moving forward to try to use any pretext to send the military. And now they have a ruling from a federal judge saying that Portland had been quiet for weeks, if not months.
Proving out that thesis, basically, that Trump is going to use the thinnest of all pretexts to be able to be able to deploy the troops into other cities within that federal circuit. So I guess the question here becomes, there is an ongoing case in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals where the Trump administration is fighting against this trial court judge, Judge Breyer, who obviously blocked the Trump administration's efforts to deploy the troops to engage in civilian law enforcement. That's the Posse Comitatus Act. Now that case is still pending in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, are these Ninth Circuit Court judges going to look at what just happened in Portland and say, hey, you know what? This is happening in real time. We're seeing the extent to which Donald Trump is abusing any deference we give him. And so will that have an adverse effect on that ongoing case? Is it possible that Trump could actually that he has a higher likelihood of losing that case because of what he is doing right now in Portland that shows the extent to which he's willing to abuse the judge's discretion here?
I think that's absolutely the case because, again, if you look at what Bonta was saying in that letter, he said, we warned you he would do this, and he did this. And then days later, a federal judge in Oregon says this pretext was untethered to the facts on the ground, that this was ludicrous. Portland has been quiet. She said in a very blistering opinion that even though Trump is entitled to deference under this rule by the Ninth Circuit, deference doesn't mean you can absolutely ignore the facts on the ground. That they have this ruling saying, you know what? Bonta's prediction came true.
Yeah. So with that said now, when do you expect that we'll see some movement in the Ninth Circuit? Because, and look, the reason that I'm so focused on this Ninth Circuit case, or any case, frankly, that has to do with these troop deployments, is because I know that this isn't just about being able to deploy the troops now. This is absolutely 100% about Donald Trump being able to deploy the troops as we head toward election time. Because if he has a legal framework to be able to deploy the troops because the Ninth Circuit gave him the go-ahead, or any other judge gave him the go-ahead, then he's going to use that as a legal framework to be able to send the troops in. And we've seen what happens, what Trump tries to do during the election. We've seen when he's tried to seize voting machines in Georgia, for example. We know that he's willing to do whatever it takes to allow himself or Republicans to steal these elections. And so if that means he's going to, send troops into Democratic strongholds like Philadelphia or Milwaukee or Detroit or Atlanta to seize the voting machines, or send troops in to do, crowd control for unruly crowds, or whatever he decides needs to happen, then these instances right here in September and October, June, July, August, September of 2025 are going to serve as the legal basis for him to do this in November of 2026 or November of 2028. So that's why I'm focused on this now. And so I guess the first question here is, when do we expect to have some ruling from the Ninth Circuit?
hard to say. They haven't put a date on the calendar. But to your point, Brian, I remember sitting through the trial for the Posse Comitatus Act. There was some remote access to that trial. And when I was listening to it, one of the first issues that came up was the order that was supposed to send the troops to California was supposed to sunset. And right before the trial, days before the trial, the Trump administration extended that order for just enough an amount of time to keep it extended through this year's elections in November. So absolutely, the state of California is thinking of the very issue that you're talking about. Yeah. I think that even before the Ninth Circuit resolves this question of whether they're going to overturn the ruling in an en banc review, we're going to see this case play out in Oregon because this is a 14-day temporary restraining order. Before the end of it, there will be more proceedings, and that might actually transpire more quickly. And it's going to call attention to the weakness of Trump's entire framework for this. It might put wind in the sails of any legal challenges coming out of Illinois with everything going on in Chicago. Right now, you have, as we said in our last conversation, one of the most favorable draws Trump could have hoped for, one of his own appointees, saying that the type of deference that presidents get over their calls regarding the military doesn't extend to ignoring every fact on the ground. And the existence of that precedent, the existence of the pushback from the state of California to try to overrule the precedent in the Ninth Circuit shows, at least on small levels, a pushback against this unprecedented use of presidential power to send the troops on the streets and through Election Day.
You know, Adam, these cases that are happening in California and in Oregon are very analogous. They're not identical, but they're analogous. And so is there a world in which, as both of these merge into the Ninth Circuit, because both fall within the Ninth Circuit's jurisdiction when they get appealed out of the trial court, as they both merge onto the Ninth Circuit, is there a way for the cases to merge, or are they going to be taken unto themselves with their own facts, and one has nothing to do with the other as far as those respective cases are concerned?
We'll see what happens. I mean, there have been a number of cases in birthright citizenship, one in that are being challenged in different places in the same circuit, and they've sometimes played out in parallel. I think it's very possible we'll see different circuits weigh in if there's a legal challenge in Chicago. I think what this legal victory for the state of Oregon will do is that it will turbocharge the existing battles. It is showing this is a live issue. It requires urgent adjudication because it's happening right now, and that the law needs to be clarified. So whether that's treated in parallel or if it happens at the same time, I think the existence of multiple legal battles will just increase the urgency of resolving that question.
Finally, let's finish off with this. I know that the judges are supposed to look at each case unto itself, right? They're not supposed to look at the broader environment or downstream effects of something. Every case is taken unto itself with its own facts, and that's it. But knowing what we know about how Trump is going to abuse any legal win that he gets as we head toward election time, and knowing how he has a proclivity to try and rig election results in his favor and his party's favor, do you think that is in the mind of these judges at all as they're offering up these rulings that will determine whether or not Trump has a future legal framework to be able to deploy these troops? So like if you and I and everybody watching right now can see plain as day that Trump is going to use all of this as his legal framework in November of 2026 or November of 2028, surely a federal judge can deduce the same thing. They have the same access to to the news and the internet that the rest of us do. They were all around on January 6, 2021. They know all of this stuff. So do you think that kind of falls into their mindset a little bit in terms of how they're ruling on this, knowing full well that their ruling on this specific case is also going to serve as the legal framework that he's going to use when he does try to, interfere in the election come 26 or 28?
Well, judges absolutely can take judicial notice of the fact that Trump extended his troop deployment order with just enough time that it extends through the election. Yeah. They understand that carries its own set of problems. Right. So I think that absolutely, yes, they will be aware of the fact that this is falling within the backdrop of someone who tried to overturn the 2020 election, the fact that this is happening, the fact that troop deployment will take place during an election season could chill people from going to the polls. That's something that can and should be on the minds of the judges, regardless of the 2020 election, that we don't want troops on the streets with gratuitously in a civilian city during an election. And that is something that I'm sure the state of California, because they brought it up in the lower courts, they're going to bring it up in the appellate courts. And yes, the election factor will be a part of the mix here, even if the judges aren't strictly, placing this in the post-2020 election context, post-January 6th context. They are aware, because it is just a plain fact that the troop deployment, at least in the state of California, was designed in such a way that it just extends past the election. The judges will have to grapple with that.
Okay. All right. Well, obviously, for all of the reasons that we just explained, as we head toward the election, this is especially important. And it's important now, because I don't want to ever fall into the trap of normalizing this idea that we should have federal troops marching in our city's streets just because Donald Trump has decided that if he does it over and over and over again, that this is somehow our new reality in the United States. So, Adam, you have done a stellar job in reporting on this. Highly recommend for anybody who is watching, if you'd like to not only follow Adam's excellent reporting, but support him and support independent media, please subscribe to his outlet, which is called All Rise News. I'm going to put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. You can also go to allrisenews.com. Highly recommend. And Adam, as always, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Brian.
I have a friend that told me about Roadrunner Sports. I was met by a fit expert. They measured my feet, watched how I walked, and showed the results. Now, with the right insoles and the right shoes, my feet are great. I no longer have the pain in my feet that I had. With me, it's Roadrunner Sports for my feet.
I'm joined now by Texas State Representative James Tallarico. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
So we know that there is this special legislative session that was called by Greg Abbott in Texas to basically to gerrymander the state's maps even further. Gavin Newsom out here where I am in California has responded and basically said, if Texas goes ahead with this, then we're going to seek to retaliate here in our state. And so now this is going to basically spark off a new cycle where the maps are going to be gerrymandered even further in multiple states across the country. First and foremost, can I have your reaction to the fact that this might happen now in California to counteract what Greg Abbott is doing in Texas, and to ask if that's having any impact on what the Texas Republicans are thinking?
Well, I'm here at the state capitol this weekend preparing for this special session that starts on Monday. And we should be coming together at the state capitol to talk about flood relief for the victims in the Hill Country and across central Texas. We should be talking about how to prevent catastrophes like that from ever happening again. But instead of focusing on the real problems, Greg Abbott is doing Trump's bidding by redrawing the Texas political maps and, taking our districts into crazy shapes to guarantee the outcome they want. I mean, the president is attempting to rig the next election And so I'm thankful that Texas Democrats, my colleagues here in the state legislature, are having conversations about how we can stop this, how we can stand up to Greg Abbott and Donald Trump. But I'm also thankful that folks in other states are also having those conversations. I mean, we as Democrats can't allow this type of power grab to go forward. We have to stand up. We have to match energy. And so I'm thankful that folks in California are promising to retaliate if Greg Abbott and Donald Trump decide to move forward with this.
In terms of the tools that you have, the Texas Democrats have at your disposal, from the minority, minority parties are generally rendered pretty weak against the majority party. Is there anything that you would be able to do? Are there any tools at your disposal that you think would actually be effective at blocking what they're looking to do?
I do. In the minority here in Texas, we have to use every tool in our toolbox. That's everything from the rules, using the rules to the best of our ability, using our platforms to raise awareness and organize people. And then, of course, they still need all of us to make quorum and be able to conduct business. And so there's a whole range of options at our disposal for how to confront this. And I think my colleagues and I are trying to figure out what that looks like. And, honestly, we haven't even gavelled in. We haven't even seen what the maps would look like. I think we want to go through some of these steps before we decide what tool to use. But regardless of our strategy, I hope that everyone, whether you're a Democrat or an independent or a Republican, realizes the danger of politicians silencing our voices and attempting to steal the next election. I mean, Brian, you've done some great coverage on the big, beautiful bill, but I mean, this was the largest transfer of wealth in American history, kicking millions of people off their health care to fund tax cuts for billionaires. They know that's unpopular, but they think they can insulate themselves from the voters with this type of power grab. And if they succeed here in Texas, they're going to do it in red states across the country. They're going to rig the 2026 election. And if that happens, they'll never have to fear the voters ever again.
Right.
They can enrich themselves and their donors with no consequences, with no accountability. And that really is going to the heart of our democracy. And I hope that's an alarm bell for all Americans and all Texans.
James, are there any of your Republican colleagues who recognize that? Are there any Republican colleagues who have enough of a basic respect for democracy that they're turned off by what's happening? Or is this just, kind of the next step in the full polarization of our politics, that when Donald Trump hands down the, issues the clarion call from up high, that Greg Abbott calls in the special legislative session, and every single Republican legislator just kind of walks the plank?
Well, I think there are certainly a number of my colleagues who recognize that this is wrong, that it's dangerous. The question is, are they going to stand up and say so? Are they going to do something about it? I still have hope that people on the other side of the aisle can have a moment of courage here and do the right thing. I'm not ready to give up on that possibility, but we as Democrats should be prepared for a scenario where they don't stand up, and that means that we've got to fight back. So we can't wait on Republican courage. We can hope for it, we can pray for it, but we certainly can't wait for it. And so I'm hopeful that Democrats, both here in Texas and honestly across the country, are going to react to this and meet the moment and stand up to this power grab.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the Speaker of the Texas State House get elected with the help of Democrats? Is that correct?
That's correct.
So isn't there some leverage that Democrats have here in terms of helping this Republican stay atop his position? Is there some basic agreement or understanding that was struck between the Democrats and the Speaker to be able, to determine the extent of the abuse or the limits to the abuses of his power that he'll usher in?
Well, I think that all remains to be seen. And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of us saw this coming. Maybe we should have, but I honestly didn't anticipate a mid-decade gerrymandering attempt. I didn't have that on my bingo card, unfortunately. But, as you mentioned, here in the Texas House, we still have some shreds of bipartisanship, and Democrats are a very large minority. A lot of people have this conception of Texas as this, deep red state, when actually it's a lot more purple than it is red. And Democrats control about 42% of the seats in the Texas House of Representatives. So we're a substantial minority. And with those numbers, you can cause a lot of chaos. And I would prefer not to do that. I would hope that our Republican colleagues, I would hope the Speaker would work with us to prevent this power grab from moving forward. And we should say, Brian, that if they're going to do this in Texas, because we are increasingly a purple state, by getting greedy, they may draw these districts so thin that we could end up flipping a lot of these districts if 2026 is a good year. So I do know that some of my Republican colleagues recognize that political danger, that by getting greedy, they actually may be handing Democrats an opportunity to win. It doesn't mean this power grab is acceptable. It's incredibly dangerous. It's an incredibly bad precedent to set, and we should stop it. But there may be some unintended consequences if they move forward.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not just the unintended consequences within Texas, but we spoke about California looking to gerrymander this state that I'm in right now. There are other states that Democrats have that could potentially be weapons on the left. We have New York, we have New Jersey. And so, the greed of Donald Trump and Greg Abbott in this scenario may very well usher in a situation where not only would those lines be drawn so thin that Democrats themselves would flip them in a good year, which 2026, at least the polling would suggest, may very well turn out to be. But it could end up leading to a situation where maps in California, in New York, in New Jersey, and other states across the country also go much more blue by virtue of these gerrymanders that were done in a retaliatory fashion.
And I just want us to pause and recognize that this is not how the system should work.
Right.
Voters should be picking their politicians, not the other way around. And right now, politicians are attempting to pick their voters by crafting the districts they want to guarantee the outcome they want. And that's just a fundamental disruption to the democratic process. And it insulates politicians in both political parties from accountability, from consequences for their actions. And that again is incredibly harmful to this American experiment. So although we need to match energy and we need to fight back and we need to stand up to these bullies, we should all recognize that this is not how things should work. This broken redistricting system is the rot at the core of our broken political system. And it's why I filed a bill in the last two legislative sessions to create an independent citizen-led redistricting commission in Texas so that we can take the power to draw political districts out of the hands of politicians and put it into the hands of the Texans we seek to represent. So that should be the ultimate goal. We can't unilaterally disarm, unfortunately, but that should be what we're working toward in the long term.
And actually, the unilateral disarmament part is kind of what I want to dig into for just a moment. Yeah. I believe there is a California Assembly member named Alex Lee. He's a member of the Progressive Caucus. Came out in defiance of Gavin Newsom's proposal to usher in our own special session so that we would be able to do mid-decade redistricting here as well. And he was against it and basically suggested that if we do this, this will just descend politics into a worse state than we were in before. And I push back against this online, suggesting that this isn't us kicking off a cycle of gerrymandering because we're in it. And Republicans have gerrymandered Ohio and North Carolina and West Virginia and Utah and Florida and looking to do the same thing in Texas right now. They've done it in Wisconsin. So there are so many states across the country where this has happened, and yet I feel like there's this mentality among Democrats that like we have to, so long as we sit atop our moral mountain, even if we're thrusting ourselves into political obscurity, that somehow derives some benefit for us, that we're gonna, I don't know, maybe confer that if we act in a certain way, that it will be reciprocated by a Republican Party that has thus far shown no desire to reciprocate, that if we confer goodwill onto them, that they'll reciprocate that goodwill, even though they've not done it. And so I'm just curious for your reaction because, look, you're a progressive Democrat as well. And I get the moral stance that somebody could take against this issue. But practically speaking, I'm just curious how you would respond to legislators here in my state who would be against this.
Well, this is a balance we have to strike. Dr. King in the civil rights movement told his movement to have a tough mind and a tender heart. and to hold both of those things together. And for me, having a tender heart means knowing why we're doing this, having that moral clarity, knowing what the vision is ultimately that we're trying to get to, and not getting lost in the back and forth that we're seeing today. But then having a tough mind means, being smart and strategic, and realizing when our politics is already descending in this direction. Right. We have to stand up to those folks who are destroying this American experiment. So we have to do both. We have to remember why we're doing this. We have to remember what we're ultimately trying to get to. We're not just trying to win for the blue team. That is not our goal. Our goal is to get political power to make people's lives better. That's the ultimate goal.
Right.
But to do that, you've got to be smart and strategic and tough. You can't lay down. You can't. We've seen that appeasement doesn't work, especially when you're facing fascism. So you have to be tough. You have to be strong, but also protect that moral clarity, that moral compass at the center of our work. That's not easy to do, but we do have to hold both together if we're going to get through this.
Literally could not have said that better. That is exactly right. And I think that has been a problem for Democrats for so long, that once we get into power, it feels like we lose our way and begin defending the processes of government as opposed to remembering why we're there. It is not to defend the filibuster. It's not to defend the status quo. It's not to defend the maps or to defend a system with least change. It's to help people have health care, and for women to have reproductive rights, and for us to combat climate change and make sure that kids aren't getting gunned down in schools. And so often, far from protecting the institutions of government, those are the impediments. So break those down if it means that you can get closer to what you want to do. But, look, people get into government and you think that, like, I'm here to defend good government. And look, my whole thing in the lead up to the 2024 election, perhaps naively, and certainly not strategically in retrospect, was to appeal to people's sense of wanting to protect democracy. But really,